How many times have you checked your phone for news in the last hour? Be honest. Was it 2 times, 5 times, 10 or more? The truth is, we don't want to miss a minute of what's happening at the White House, in Congress, or in hotspots a world away in places like Ukraine or Israel. But how do you decide which news sources to follow? How do you make the distinction between entertainment and journalism? And if you're a Christian, a follower of Jesus, how do you make certain your reaction doesn't tarnish your witness to the world around you? Jeff Coleman and I tackle those questions next on State of Independence. Don't go away. When we're off the air, my friend and producer Jeff Coleman often talks about the gap between what people think about the news and reality. As some of you know, before launching this program on Lighthouse TV, I spent many years after my work in the White House as a cable news commentator, providing perspective on breaking news and covering events like national political conventions and the day-to-day activities of presidential campaigns. But few viewers know how news is made. So few know who or what sources to believe. So with events being reported by the minute, you, the viewer, are being asked to understand and interpret far more content than ever before. It's coming at you pretty fast, isn't it? So Jeff and I thought it would be helpful today to pull the curtain back just a little on the way news is made. Our hope is that it helps you to be a better consumer of the news and overall a better citizen. Jeff, why is this so important?
Well, Joe, it's so important, I think, because it takes up, as you say, so much of our day. There isn't a minute of the day, except maybe the hours where we're sleeping, where we're not exposed to a new piece of information and we're asked to analyze it. We're almost asking the entire country, it seems, to have an opinion about everything. So if it's a forest fire in the northwest part of the country, if it's a rocket launch in Ukraine or Tel Aviv, or if it is the nuances of what's happening to the president's health or the vice president's health or one of the first family's children, every minute it's going into, we're asked to assimilate it, and it's often just how do you fit that into what you already think? So it's a place that Scripture warns believers, Christians, about the damage that gossip does. We say, well, but it's news. It's not gossip. Is it? What's the difference between straight up gossip, tale-bearing, bearing false witness against your neighbor, and what we interpret as news? I think once you add a camera, a news anchor, some pretty graphics, it somehow becomes news, and we feel, perhaps as consumers, that it's okay to just go right to social media and repeat that. And that's why I think it's so important.
Yeah, well, it's a different world than it used to be. I mean, once upon a time, you just had the news on the major networks, and you had a news anchor reporting the news, and everybody took it as, and I don't think anybody, or didn't seem to the consumer like anybody was trying for ratings.
Right.
It just seemed like, these people were there to report the news and to give you information that you needed to know, and that was it. And but there was no Instagram, there was no Facebook, there was no Twitter or X as they call it now. There was, none of these other platforms existed, but they do now.
But it's almost like back then, as you're describing it, you'd have, if Dan Rather were broadcasting the CBS Evening News Tonight, or Tom Brokaw or Peter Jennings, and then everyone in the country has a small station, right? You'd have the information, and then you'd have everybody arguing about that information. Now, I don't think it was a golden age where one of those anchors was free from being biased or was perfectly fair with the presentation of the facts. But that's where you took that half an hour of information, and you could do your research, you could make a decision, do I care about this issue or not? What changes about the internet is that when you have, say, 100 friends on Facebook, or 1,000, or 3,000, or 4,000, every one of them is broadcasting something. They may have been walking down the street and they heard a piece of news and they said, hey, I want to weigh in on that news story. It shows up on your phone and you say, well, I wonder what my opinion is. And it is almost like someone is over here with a cattle prod poking you every second of the day. That's a little bit different, right, from what the news you're describing.
Way different. It's way different. I mean, so now you don't just have the three network anchors providing you with information, over the course of a half hour that is pretty much unbiased, just straight information. This happened today, and so it's up to you to kind of at least know the information. But now you've got all these networks, hundreds,
yeah.
and you've got all these different platforms that are giving you versions of the news. A lot of them are just giving their opinion on the news, and so how does the consumer, how do we, the consumer, distinguish between what is entertainment and what is actually factual news, and how do we get away from I think we all have a natural tendency to want to hear what we want to hear.
Right.
So how do we not let our natural tendency to go to the network or the platform that is going to tell us what we want to hear what we need to know, which may be the unvarnished truth?
So let's speak to the subset of our audience that identify as Christians. So if you are there, if you are somebody who says, I follow Jesus, I read the Bible, then part of that is the first lens that you have to kind of order your dinner plate by, right? So you say, look, I'm going to cut out all of the stuff that's not essential. And I'll say, what are the things God cares about? How does he care about people? How does he care about families? What does he think about public corruption? What does he think about dishonest business people? What does he think about political leaders? What is his standard for political leaders? And then you take that and you apply it to the news of the day. You say, well, that doesn't fit this standard. This doesn't fit and I know what people are saying is, but then we wouldn't have anybody. We would have no politicians, we would have no business people, because the world is corrupt and it's broken. Well, the issue does God's standard change on this in some way? Does he suddenly make allowances? No, we're always trying to write the story, square it up with his standard. Now, that doesn't mean that you boycott every store that doesn't agree with your political opinions, or you can't vote in an election because there's only a couple choices. You can navigate those things between you and God and your conscience. Here's what it does, though. I think when you approach it from that perspective, you take a longer view of the issues. You say, look, I'm a citizen of the United States of America, but I'm also, and first and foremost, a citizen of heaven. So then I am freed then from the pressure of, if my party does something that violates those core principles, from stepping in line and saying, well, I just can't say anything because I've put the team jersey on, so I can't be critical, or I can't make a judgment call and say this doesn't fit with what I believe. That takes away all of the pressure from feeling that you have to be a campaign manager, a strategist, you've got to think like a consultant, you've got to think like a news producer, you've got to think like an anchor person. And it says, I'm just going to be a simple follower of Jesus, care about what he cares about, and when there's something wrong in the world that violates his standard, then I'll challenge it. I'll do it graciously, I'll do it with civility, I'll do it with kindness, but I'm not going to be silent about those things.
And what do you do when everybody else around you, who also self-identifies as Christian, is going along with the crowd, is doing what everybody else does, is responding to news the way other people do, flipping the finger toward the camera, that kind of stuff, which Jesus wouldn't do that.
I think this is where you take a deep breath and you have to put yourself in the position of the person who's reacting that way. And you've got to know, like, what's the story? You see somebody on Facebook reacting negatively towards a public figure or having an opinion and expressing it. Generally speaking, that person is going through a lot. They have experienced a hard marriage. They have a child who's not talking to them. They have a diagnosis. They might be posting on Facebook from their hospital bed. I mean, people are connected and expressing their frustrations, not just because they have political opinions, they want to say them. Nobody's sitting at a desk. Everybody's in their car, they're walking, they're talking, they're in the mall, they're shopping, they're taking a break from between aisle 5 and aisle 6 and saying, ooh, I wonder what's happening, I need to check in, and then I've got to say something, and then they're posting it on social media. So how do you react to people who are loud, boisterous, deeply opinionated, and unkind? With love, with respect, with kindness. The way that I've seen you many, many times react on a network show where man, somebody's going to get away with a point, or you're the last. Often I've seen you on cable TV, and they're about to cut to a break, and you don't get the last word. That's got to be deeply frustrating, right?
Yeah, it is. No, you're right, brother. As long as we always remember to whom it is we will one day answer, and who it is we serve, and who it is we follow, and what His Spirit in our hearts means. Like if the fruits of God's Spirit exist in us, then it produces all the things that the Spirit is supposed to produce. Kindness and gentleness and generosity and love and peace and patience and forgiveness.
That's right.
And these are all things that are curiously absent in the world. How do we help? So how do you help the average person watching news make good decisions about what to watch and how to decipher between what is actually factual and what is really appealing to my anger or my set of beliefs? What do you say to them?
Maybe this is a way to do it. Maybe it is a way, if you're listening to a reporter, now you think you're listening to someone who's speaking information to you, you have to consider what the point of view is of the people who are programming the station, the owners, the news director, people who are writing the script. Yes, it's a cooperative effort between that big news team and the anchor person who's on the air. But you really have to consider why. Why are you driving this question today? What you've told me many times as you've taken me behind the curtain to the cable news world is that most of these fights are pre-programmed before you go on the air. So everybody's happy in the green room and having snacks and drinking coffee, and then you go on the air and everyone plays a role.
Yeah.
If people knew that these folks aren't really enemies, that most politicians aren't enemies, that you're being essentially played because the audience needs to be hyped up, and so you want the boxers to fight, you want the opposing teams to look angry at each other, I think people would view the news differently. So how do you discern? I think you have to get inside in some ways, think, why are you telling me this information? Do you want me to take action? Do you want me to run into the fire and put out the wildfires in California? Are you trying to get me upset about climate change or trying not to believe there's no climate change? Are you trying to get me to act on an issue like gun control or gun rights? Where are you coming from with the stories that you've selected? Once you apply those discerning filters on top, you can be a consumer of news that isn't kind of being prodded into turning by staying with that channel. The goal is always that you never want to look away from that breaking news story or that red alert.
Right. Well, we're offering a little behind the curtain perspective to help you become better citizens and more effective ambassadors for the gospel where you live and work. We'll be right back.
You're watching Joe Watkins' State of Independence on Lighthouse TV. Positively different. Share your comments about today's program in the comment box at joewatkins.org.
Share what you've learned on today's program by first connecting with Joe directly on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Get started at joewatkins.net.
We're talking about the news and how to be more discerning consumers. First, here's a stat you might find interesting. 86% of us get our news from smartphones, computers, or tablets. That's a pretty big shift from a few years ago when we were still reading the newspaper or tuning into one of the big three networks. Jeff, what do you think the impact has been on the quality of news when we consume it in bite-sized clips on TikTok or even on YouTube?
So one of the things I hear all the time, people say to me, did you hear? Did you hear what's happened? And they'll give me a headline or they'll give me a fact. The president is landing. The president is taking off. The president is thinking about firing this person. Congress is convening hearings. Now, ask the follow-up question, why are they doing that? Where are they going? It's, well, I don't know, I didn't read a story about it. I just saw this in my feed, right? So what you're doing is you're scrolling through, you go through 100 stories, 2 or 3 of those kind of fit something you're interested in at that moment. Right. You don't care about the story about the fishing vessel that sank off the coast of, in the Caribbean. You don't really care about, some humanitarian disaster in Africa. You're scrolling through all that and you're just picking up the pieces, the headlines. And then at the end of it, by the time you arrive at your destination, you get off the train, you get off the bus, you walk into church, right? You have one little piece of information. Now, what happens when you meet then somebody who's been doing that too, right? And hopefully, maybe you're aligned. You read the same headline. Now, there's no context. There's no who, what, where, when, why, kind of the basic framework of a news story. You have these 2 headlines and you get together with somebody and say, did you hear? And they say, yes, I heard. And then what is the next thing? Well, I think. And then they say, well, I think. And you're trying to I think the other person. Instead of saying, what do you think the truth is here? What do you think actually is happening? Because when you can do that with a headline, you take away all of the humanity from it, right? You don't look at somebody being a person, you look at them being a headline. You can hate a headline. You think, well, Jesus meant I have to love my neighbor. This person isn't my neighbor. This person is out to destroy the country, my way of life, everything I believe in. So they're not human anymore. Therefore, these rules don't apply to me. See how that plays tricks on you?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, even though we have a different landscape now and all these new platforms that didn't exist some years ago, they also have the same motive in mind, which is viewers, ratings. They need you to watch. Because that's how people get paid in the industry, so they need you to watch. So they needed to, whatever it is, they need to figure out how to make the story attractive enough to get you to watch so they can put more money in their pockets. That's right. How it works. So here it is now, you've been gifted. This network is doing something spectacular, I think, by creating a new morning show, Morning Light. And the news is the news. It's what the information is the information, whatever it is. But I don't get the sense that Lighthouse TV has ever been in it for the money, has ever been in it to, for ratings. Like how many viewers can we get? They've never had a sense towards the sensational, which is just whatever we need to do, we'll do to bring more viewers in. Right. That's never been the way that Lighthouse has operated. And it's never been about that or money. It's always been about the gospel of Jesus and how do we get people to know who Jesus is so they can accept him, follow him. So you've been gifted with this opportunity with this new show, Morning Light, which will start in August, which is a blessing. Every morning, 9 o'clock, and you have this opportunity. How do you, as a Christian person, as a follower of Jesus, with the wonderful perspective you have, you're not just a Christian guy, you're a well-educated guy who happens to be a believer, a follower of Jesus, who also was one of the youngest members to ever serve in the state legislature as a state rep, who has worked with U.S. senators and U.S. congressmen and governors and people all around the country. And you have a national and a global perspective that is second to none. But you're first and foremost a follower of Jesus, and now you're the anchor of this morning show. What do you hope to accomplish, and how do you hope to get the news across to people in a way that's not one-sided, not trying to sell something, that's not trying to get them to watch again tomorrow, but is really getting them to see? How do you do that?
Well, I think first you've got to get over the idea that, well, if I am a Christian, there's the news, and then there's your faith talk. And I'm saying, no, it's one and the same. Like the lens with which you look at the news has got to be the worldview that you bring. So you may come to the news as someone who says, well, I'm completely agnostic. I don't believe that there's a God of the universe. I don't believe that there's anything special about me versus somebody else. We're just kind of all here on the planet trying to figure out this. That that leaves you with a very dark view of the news headlines. It feels pretty desperate. If you're looking at the news that way, there really is no tomorrow. You are fighting for air today, so there's a certain desperation. Now, if I am a believer, I have to fuse the news with this reality, meaning don't forget that you have food on the stove that you're cooking while you're watching the news. Some people today forget to eat because forget to take care of themselves, forget to exercise, forget to get out of the chair, forget to take a walk, forget to check on the widow next door because the news headlines are so engaging, right? We are through in one of the most intense periods of news content generation, and it is not going to go away. This is almost as if somebody is taking us by the arms every few minutes and just shaking us and saying, did you hear, did you hear, did you know? So in the mornings, our goal of this program is, yes, we want to look at the 2 or 3 or 4 anxiety-driving headlines of the day. And then we're going to hopefully step back and remind you, where does this fit into the big story? Where does this fit in to the larger world that you live in, that you don't have to wish that you were on the battlefield somewhere else, or you don't have to meet people on the street and instead of saying good morning, you say whatever it is. Because people, here's what I think people don't realize often about social media. And you know this, Joe. Our likes and our shares are feeding that information back to the social media platform that we're on. Right. And it's just feeding us more of that diet. So that would be like if I ate a steady diet of green or blue M&Ms, it is going to feed me, the machine is going to give me more green and blue M&Ms. So there's no way to control that diet. So if you are constantly looking at stories about weather patterns, and weather patterns are what give you the most anxiety, the beauty of social media is it will give you more anxiety-driving stories about weather. If you really like shoes, which unfortunately every now and then I check out, I'll buy shoes online. And what happens for the next week? The internet's telling me I need to buy this pair of shoes and every version of it at every price point. And at some point I have to say, I can't look at any more shoes, right? Same thing with the news. So if a consumer, if you and I can look at the news and say, oh, wait a second, I think I know what the machine, what the internet is trying to tell me to do, and walk away from it and say, I need to read a book. I need to read my Bible. I need to pray. I need to talk to a human being. I think you would approach it all differently. Yeah. It's a long answer, but.
No, it's wonderful because people are, the news does create anxiety. That's why some people don't watch it at all. Right. Because they don't want that anxiety. They figure like life is full of enough challenges, right, let alone watch that and then
I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
People say, I don't want to, I just unplug.
Right. So they don't want to watch, but what if they could watch TV, get the news, but not be filled with anxiety because they know that they're grounded in Christ, you know? Who does that? Nobody does that that I know of. It doesn't exist right now.
I think there's a lot of Christian programming out there, and it is good, well-intentioned programming. It is designed to kind of put a Christian spin on things. I don't think there's a Christian spin and a non-Christian spin. I think there just is the world as we believe it is made and created. That when you believe that people are made in God's image and deserve a certain dignity and respect for that, that changes the way you talk about people. It may not be as entertaining, and it certainly may not draw as many eyeballs, and it won't be as sensational. If we used to go in the grocery aisle, and when my mom and dad were taking me with them, and I'd remember the National Enquirer and all the other all of the other magazines that were there about President Clinton was abducted by aliens, or Nancy Reagan's, all of the fascinating intrigue, and you'd sit there and you'd find yourself imagining, I wonder if that's really true, right? That steady diet of that kind of sensational news is so corrosive and so destructive. And then what happens, Scripture talks about out of the heart, the mouth speaks. So if your heart is gorging on a buffet of juicy, salacious gossip, the things that you post online is going to be juicy and salacious. when you encounter a person, a real live flesh and blood person, not online, what's going to come out of you is juicy, salacious gossip. And so how do you do all the things that we want to do? Fix communities, make people not feel lonely. We're going to talk a lot on the morning show about this epidemic of loneliness, which everybody agrees and identifies. People watching today, whether they're in a correctional facility, whether they're in a personal care home, whether they are in a home that they lived in all their life and they're the last living member of their family, whether they're a brand new couple just starting out. They are all in the same position, right, of having to live and operate in a world and evaluate all of these events. It would be reckless and irresponsible if we keep feeding them the green and blue M&Ms.
Yeah, I like M&Ms actually. Yes, that's a great.
Did you eat them for breakfast this morning is the question, Joe.
If I didn't have parents who taught me better, I would have. I
think I would too.
You know, but I was so grateful to have.
You do have a
parents.
sweet tooth.
I do.
People don't know that about you, but yeah, you do.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of whetting my appetite, my sweet tooth for news and information, because I get tired of what a lot of the platforms try to do is they now, because people are so interested in getting clicks or views or likes, that kind of stuff, people are doing crazy stuff, outrageous stuff to get the likes. And then so people say, hey, did you see the guy that did the such and such? And say, let me see. And they say, wow, that's like, right. It's crazy. And then so it gets 1 million views, 1 million likes. I like the fact that this is not about trying to outrage, win the war of outrage, that this is all about trying to be a good Christian person and provide news information. Well, whether you're watching from your living room, on the treadmill, or running errands, the Bible provides a roadmap on the right and wrong way to receive and respond to information. It warns us from being gossips. It warns us from being false with our neighbors. It demands a standard of truth that's uncompromising. Of course, it's an impossible standard to keep without God's help, but it's essential that we strive for it every time we receive new information. If you have questions or comments for me or for Jeff, please use the comment box at joewatkins.org. I'd love to hear from you. I'll read and reply to each message. For Jeff Coleman and the entire team here at Lighthouse TV, thanks for being with us tonight. From America's first capital, Philadelphia, I'm Joe Watkins. Thanks so much for watching. God willing, I'll see you again next week. I'm so excited for this show, for Morning Light. I just think it's just what a refreshing breath of fresh air to not be out to be spectacular, but just to love people like you love yourself, and to share the news of the day as well as the good news of the gospel.
Yeah, the temptation is always to take the platform like that and try to make it entertaining. How do they so you're doing well.
Joe Watkins' State of Independence is a production of Lighthouse TV, positively different. Made possible in part because of the support of viewers like you. Learn more about Joe Watkins and the mission of this program at joewatkins.net. And tell Joe what you thought about today's program in the comment box.